T-minus 7 days. That's where we are. Well, I guess it depends when you're listening to this, but it's definitely draft season. We're at the peak of draft season. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline with you. The NFL draft is a week away, folks. It's exciting. We're pumped up. We're ready to go. Last week, we did our offensive position breakdowns, going deeper than our kind of top 5 and 10s and guys that we really like second day, a little bit of third day in there too. And we'll do that on defense today. At the end of the show, a lot of you submitted some Twitter questions. We will get to those too. But first, I always like to have Tony open his notebook a little bit. He has his ear to the ground. He has his phone on his cheek, and he's trying to figure out what's going on, Tony. So as these teams now are getting close to the completion of their draft meetings, most teams will have their boards set by the end of the weekend, if not by Friday this week, depending on how teams operate. What are some of the things you're starting to hear? And I'm going to throw a couple of things I've heard at you and see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, and really this weekend, beginning of next week, is when the information will start to flood out. But I mean, the big two things that I've heard over the past 24 to 48 hours is a lot of teams have Hendon Hooker as their third rated quarterback, as QB3, as I do. And I still think Anthony Richardson and Will Levis will likely be selected before Hendon Hooker because of the injury. But the more I hear, it only takes one team, but don't be surprised if Will Levis, is selected or drops much further in the draft than people are expecting. And then the other thing that I'm hearing is, we knew it was kind of a blasé, if you will, wide receiver class, and that is coming more and more into focus. I'm told right now there were only two receivers that have first round grades: Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers may go in the first round. Jordan Addison of USC may go in the first round. There are some teams that have a third round grade on Jordan Addison because of the combination of the smaller frame and the lack of deep speed, even though he is a great route runner and a pass catcher. So I think that we may be in for some surprises come draft night as far as the receivers are concerned, with fewer receivers than we expect being selected in round 1.
All right, here are a couple of things that I've kind of noticed as people that I think talk to people with some of their mock drafts, and they've kind of put this out there, and I think, I trust them, Tony, to an extent. Are you sure the Texans are going to stay put and take a quarterback at number 2 if Bryce Young's off the board? There seems to be a lot of noise there that maybe they move out and pick a quarterback later. Maybe they, just trade out completely. What are you hearing about Houston at 2?
Have not heard anything as of yet. I'm sure I will hear something next week, because literally the Monday or Tuesday before last year's draft is when I started reporting that the Texans were going to take Stingley with that third pick.
Yeah, you were right on, by the way.
Which really, was a bit of a bombshell. I've heard nothing. I've heard the rumors about Cesario possibly leaving after the draft. I'm told that's very unlikely to happen. I think I will have a better next week's show. I'll have a better grip on what the Texans may do.
And Bryce Young locked in at number 1 at this point. Have you heard that?
A lot of people have told me that. A lot of people in the league have said, yeah, that's the way it looks. That's the way it seems. I'm just going to hedge my bets until the beginning of next week.
Fair. And the other sense that I'm getting, Tommy, just in terms of big draft trends, and one of our shows next week will be, I'll kind of set up a bunch of big draft questions for Tony, and he'll try to kind of answer them for us with what he's hearing. It seems to me that corners and offensive linemen, which is a need for a lot of teams in like the top 15-ish, 18-ish, I think they're going to fly off the board in this draft. And to your point, I think wide receivers are going to get pushed down a little bit.
And that should not come as a surprise to anybody, because, the media is all quarterback hungry, and the quarterbacks you take up all the oxygen in the room when it comes to the draft and the media. Historically, you look back at the drafts, and teams always want offensive linemen in plenty amounts, or they draft them much earlier than people expect, especially offensive tackles. Teams always want cornerbacks, and they always draft them. I mean, a couple of years ago, we had 6 cornerbacks selected in the first round, and 3 guys were surprise first-round picks. I believe 2 of them are no longer in the league. 1 guy's a backup. So that's not unusual, and they want pass rushers. So, what you're saying, it, kind of fits in to the history of the draft, even though it may come as a surprise to people.
All right, so here's what we did today. We're focusing on defense, and we've set it up into 6 different groups, and we're going to go through Tony's top 10s, any other sleepers he might have, and then we can take a look at some of the guys that we like in those groups. We were going to do 5, but then I think Tony made a great point. There's so many edge rushers in this class. We've kind of split that into defensive line edge rushers and 3-4 outside linebacker edge rushers. So that's how we set it up.
And just, John, just if I can, I mean, I'm a traditionalist, and, you talk about Nolan Smith being an edge rusher or Keon White being an edge rusher. I don't like to broad brush or kind of pigeonhole those guys because they're so much more complete players.
Yeah, and Tony, by the way, if you stand those two guys next to each other, they don't play the same position. Like one's 40 pounds heavier than the other.
Right. Exactly. But they want to be classified as edge rushers. And in my opinion, that's wrong for those players. That's even wrong. Listen, Bill Parcells used to say, you're a football player. Doesn't matter, what position you could play football. And that's what these guys do so well.
All right, so let's start with the edge players because I think that's probably a good place to go. People are very excited about them. So let's lead off with them, Toby. Then we'll hit defensive tackle after we hit the edge guys. We'll start off with the bigger guys that are more your traditional 4-3 ends here. And this is your top 10, and then we'll talk about some of the guys we haven't done much on yet. Tyree Wilson at number 1, Myles Murphy at number 2, Lucas Van Ness at number 3. All 3 of those players with first-round grades for you. Keon White, number 4, with a 1/2, so end of first round, beginning of second. Tui Pelotu with a second-round grade as your number 5. I don't think we've talked much about him, so we'll touch on him too. Zach Harrison at number 6 from Ohio State, the big edge player for them. Felix Eneduki-Uzama, a good player we have not talked about much here. You have a second or third-round grade on him. Tuli and Harrison, you have second-round grades on. Then you have third-round grades on Colby Wooden, Vilami Fahoko, who I think we talked about a little about last week, Yaya Diaby, and Mike Morris at number 11 for you. All right, Tony, I'm going to kind of do a couple questions, and then we'll kind of talk about the guys we want to talk about. Any chance Tyree Wilson bumps ahead of Will Anderson for the first defensive end edge rusher off the board, or no?
I'd be shocked. I mean, he's a little bit bigger. He's got better growth potential. I would absolutely be shocked. You look at Will Anderson's body of work, but 2022 was an off year for him, yet he still had great numbers because he was so fantastic in 2021. I'd be surprised.
Fair enough. All right, now let's go a little bit deeper down this list here. You kind of have them in tiers, right? You have the first 2 guys, Wilson and Murphy. They kind of stand above the other guys, I think. You have Van Ness coming in next. Then you have kind of these bigger guys, right? You have Van Ness, Keon White, Tui Pelotu, who was kind of a tweener last year, right? Zach Harrison, a bigger edge player. Let's look at that group first. What is it that kind of stands out, especially with Tui Pelotu and Zach Harrison, that gives you second-round grades on those guys?
I think Tui Pelotu is, he's not the biggest guy in the world. 6'3", 266 pounds at the combine. Doesn't have great growth potential. He was, told or characterized to me as a big, fast, athletic guy, who was able to rush the passer, which he does well, and he's very intense. As far as I know, he's not run the 40 before the draft. Didn't run at the combine. Didn't run at USC Pro Day, which he said he had a hamstring issue, and USC Pro Day was run under a deluge. I mean, it was basically a flood on the field. Can't blame him for not running. So I think he's sort of is he a defensive end in a 4-man front? He's not big enough to use as a 3 technique guy. He can stand over tackle. He did that rather successfully at USC. I think he is a good player. He doesn't have the great amount of upside, which I believe Zach Harrison does. And I think Zach Harrison is underrated. 6'5", 6'5 and a half, 269 pounds, 4'6", in the 40. I was at the Pro Day. He's insanely athletic. If you watch the film, I mean, he's a guy who goes very hard. He's not just an edge rusher. He shows a good inside move. You go back and you watch the game against Maryland where it was kind of nip and tuck at the end of the game. He torched Jalen Duncan twice late in the game and basically secured the game for Ohio State. He's got outstanding growth potential. So, I mean, I have Tui Pelotu rated slightly higher than Zach Harrison. 2 or 3 years down the road, it wouldn't surprise me if Harrison turns out to be the better player.
Yeah, I don't think either guy is super bendy, like that they're going to get on the edge like a Brian Burns or whatever and bend it. But I think both play with good power, to your point, and I think they use that strength in their size pretty well. I want to touch on Eneduki-Uzama, who you have your second and third round grade on. I have Tui Pelotu and Harrison as a 2-3, so a second/third round. I have Eneduki-Uzama myself ahead of them. And I got to be honest with you, Tony, I just think he used a lot of different moves. I thought he has a lot of tricks in his bag. He uses his length. He does the push-pull with the length, right, to get the offensive lineman off balance. He has a quick inside moves. He can bend a little bit off the edge too. So, I think he's going to be a pretty good player. I thought his run defense can use a little bit of work. I think he's not as stout as you want on the edge. But as a pass rusher, I think he's going to come in and he's going to be pretty effective right away. I like him a lot.
Where are you going to use him, though? 6'3.5", 255 pounds.
Fair
Is
question.
he a defensive end? Is he a stand-up? I agree. And he plays strong for his size. He's not a guy that gets obliterated at the point. He's very, raw. He needs to improve his techniques, good movement skills, can get down the line of scrimmage in pursuit. Didn't time in the 40 before the draft, although he timed in the 3-cone. He ran a decent 3-cone, which I'm wondering why, he's running the 3-cone and not the 40. Is he trying
What was his 3-cone?
I believe it was under 7. It was like 6.95 or something.
That's nice.
It was a good time. And he shows those movement skills on film. I mean, he's a guy who can change direction. You mentioned the inside move. He can chase from the backside. I just think he's going to have to get a little bit bigger. He's going to have to get a little bit stronger. He really is going to have to complete his game. Does he have more upside than Tuipulotu? Possibly, but I think right now he's got more downside risk as well.
Tony, I have not watched Colby Wooden or Viliami Fehoko. They're on my list for this week as I cram to get ready here. Give me your rundown on those two guys, and then I'll touch on Diaby and Morris.
I have watched Colby Wooden for 3 years now. And as a freshman, I thought Colby Wooden was a surefire first-round prospect. I mean, what he showed as a freshman at Auburn, it just blew me away. But his game seemingly leveled off and even kind of regressed. He never improved the way I had hoped he would improve. 6'4", 273 pounds, runs a 4.79. Is he a defensive end? Is he interior guy? He's someone who has got a lot of potential, has got a big body of work, showed a lot of possibilities early in his Auburn career, but has really got to start to pick up his game. Someone's got a lot of fire in this guy, because if he doesn't, start to produce and start to play up to his level of expectations, he's going to be looking for a new line of work real soon. Fehoko is a guy, San Jose State. Not too many people talk about him because San Jose State plays at 10:30 at night on Saturday night. But he is a guy who, has the intensity of many of the guys that we spoke about, has the movement skills and the athleticism. 6'4", 282 pounds, ran a 4.72 at Pro Day. He shows those great movement skills. He plays like his hair's on fire. He's not a pure edge rusher, although he is a good pass rusher. He's a good run stopper. He can get down the line of scrimmage. He makes a lot of athletic plays. And he's a guy who is athletic, with good size, with growth potential, who just go all the time. I mean, he is someone who is very enjoyable to watch. And I think a defensive coordinator is going to take a liking to him, or a defensive coach is going to take a liking to him because of his approach and because of the fact you could probably do so many things with him, down the road as he develops his game.
All right, I'm going to jump to Yaya Diaby here from Louisville, Tony, because he caught my eye at the Senior Bowl, where I thought as the week went along, he played better and better. Then he tested really well at the combine. He ran a 4.51 40-yard dash. And when I watched him, look, I think he's really raw, but he's got a great motor. He plays really hard. He knows how to use his strength. He knows how to use his length. He just has to develop more pass rush moves, but I think it's there. And I think if you can figure out how to harness what he has, I think he'd be a really great fit. And I think Mike Morris is kind of the opposite, right? Who's your last guy here, where to me, he's solid. You know what you're getting. I almost see him as a 3-4 end, where he's almost playing that, 4-eye, 5 technique rather than rushing off the edge. His testing was just so poor, and I'm sure he might even be off the board for some teams with how bad his testing was.
Well, his testing was poor because I believe he had an ankle injury. And I was told that at the combine, where he was told not to, run the 40, but he decided of his own volition to run it because he was competitive. But I know for a fact that really since the combine, he had an ankle injury that he hurt during training, and that has really hampered him. But you're right. I mean, the testing numbers are going to hurt, especially since he's an underclassman, and you really don't know. There's not a lot of information on him. 6'5", 275 pounds. You're right. He's sort of, is he stand-up over end type of guy? Is he a 4-3 end? Is he a 3-4 guy? What do you do with him? He's going to have to fill out his frame. He's going to have to develop his game. I think with Diaby, he kind of played defensive end in Louisville, but he had the athleticism to stand over tackle. He's a smaller defensive end at 265 pounds, which I think hurt him against the run. But he's got great athleticism. He is a real good pass rusher. I think what will happen is they'll develop him and use him in different roles and have him progress on the field as a guy who could stand up over tackle on occasion, as someone who comes out of a three-point stance in a four-man line, and really he's got a great amount of upside just based on the testing numbers alone. Never mind the fact he's been a good player for a couple of years at Louisville. He's not a one-year wonder.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to the outside linebacker edges. Those are the smaller guys. A lot of the guys we've talked a bunch about, so we'll skip over them. Will Anderson at 1, Nolan Smith at 2, BJ Ojulari at 3. You do have a first-round grade on Ojulari. You have Will McDonald as a 1/2. I have those two guys very close to each other myself, the Ojulari and McDonald. Byron Young out of Tennessee, who we've talked about, the very raw but 25-year-old edge rusher out of Tennessee, who ran a ridiculous 4.41 at the combine. Then here's the interesting guys. You have Trenton Simpson here at 6'2", 235, and we've talked about him, and we kind of struggled playing that inside linebacker position, Tony, in terms of seeing things. So let's start there. You like him as more of a run and hit guy. Then you have Derek Hall, Isaiah Foskey, Nick Herbig, Nick Hampton. We'll hit all those guys. But first, Simpson, in terms of where you think he's going to fit in the modern NFL, because it's like his position's almost being faded out a little bit in a lot of ways.
Right. You think he's a traditional 4-3 weak side linebacker, right?
Right.
He's got great athleticism. He covers a lot of area on the field. You watch the film, he'll go 40 yards downfield with the receiver, run step for step with the receiver and cover the receiver, and he doesn't do a bad job. The problem with Simpson, and I said it all along, even in my summer preview, is, you can tell the instincts aren't there. He's more a guy who thinks rather than reacts. And what happens is when he thinks, the play is already in process, and he's able to make up for it with his great athleticism. That's going to be a difficult, you can't do that as easily on Sunday. Recover with that speed because everyone's so much faster. Where does he fit? Well, I mean, there are still teams that use a weak side linebacker. You can probably stick him on the inside of a 3-4 as a run and chase sort of linebacker. Christian Kirksey had a lot of success doing that. So I think somebody will find a place for him because of the athleticism, because of his ability to get from point A to point B so quickly, and his cover skills. I mean, the fact is, 3rd and 6, you don't have to take him off the field. You say, you cover number 85, the tight end. You stay with them step for step, anywhere on the field, and he has the athleticism to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Foskey and Derek Hall are your next two. Hall's your other guy with a 2nd-round grade. Foskey with a 3rd-round grade. Foskey, to me, he's a solid guy that you can play. He just doesn't have the athletic traits to me to be a big-time pass rusher. He'll be productive. He'll get his numbers. But to me, he's a rotational defensive end type, maybe an average starter at best. I love Derek Hall. Now, I'm a sucker for some of these undersized pass rushers because I just like their juice. I think he gets on the edge. He has his little dip and rip move. He uses his length well, Tony. I know he's smaller, and he's only 250 pounds, but I think if you get him in the right system, he could be a really efficient designated pass rusher in his first year on 3rd downs at DPR. And then you can hopefully deepen out the rest of his game, or he can give you a little bit more over a longer period of time.
See, I'm going to disagree with you because when you watch the film, he does more than just rush up the field. He gets out in the space to make plays. He gets out in the flanks and coverage. He's good against the run. I mean, he's one of those guys that, he's an edge rusher. In my opinion, no, he's not great in coverage. He's not a Trent Simpson that's going to go 30 yards down the field with opponents. But you wanted somebody that can play, in the box in the 10 to 15-yard area or 10-yard area, getting out to the sidelines, making plays against the run and pursuit, covering tight ends, and, rushing the passer. Hall has shown the ability to do that throughout his Auburn career. Foskey, I tend to agree with you. Foskey's a good pass rusher. Is he a defensive end? You can stand him up over tackle. Did run 4.58 at the combine, which is a good time, and has shown those pass rush skills. The problem with Foskey, as we saw at the Senior Bowl, once a blocker gets his hands on him, game over. So he's going to have to improve his strength. He's going to have to prove that he's more than just a guy who likes to rush the edge wide and get up the field, and he's got to develop a complete game.
All right, give me Nick Herbig and Nick Hampton. What do those guys bring?
Yeah, Herbig is a tough, intense, not overly athletic 3-4 outside linebacker who can rush the pass at 240 pounds. Hampton's a guy who, he's a smaller edge rusher. And we talked to Jim Nagy about this, if you remember, before the Senior Bowl. And I asked, are they going to use Nick Hampton in space at all to get him to make plays in reverse? Because throughout his Appalachian State career, all he did was basically stand up over tackle and make plays up the field. And Nagy's response on the show was, well, he's a great pass rusher. Why take him out of that element? So that's the way teams like him. I would like to see him develop more of a complete game, 6'2.5", 236 pounds. Tough, intense guys. My concern with Hampton is, how's he going to disengage from blocks at the next level? The NFL is a lot more difficult than the Sun Belt, playing against Coastal Carolina and, those middle of the road teams there. So he's going to have to develop more of a complete game.
Agreed. Let's go to the defensive tackle spot here, Tony. You have Jalen Carter as your number 1, Brian Brzee as your number 2, Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern as your number 3 with a 1-2 grade. I think people will raise their eyebrows and say, whoa, ahead of Mazi Smith. Well, they're literally right next to each other on your board. They're like ganged up. And right behind them is Kalijah Kancey, and right behind him is Keanu Benton, to be honest with you. So that's kind of a group you have there right at the end of the first round, top of the second round, Tony. I think you can make an argument to order those guys any way you want. Just your thoughts on how you kind of stack those 4 and why.
Well, I mean, Adebawore is a guy, you could use him on the inside. You can use him on the outside. He's got adequate size at 6'1.5", 283 pounds, but he looks like a big guy. As we were sitting next to each other, and he was dominant 3 days of Senior Bowl practice. He could not be stopped against what was good offensive linemen. I mean, he was there every single day on the outside, on the inside. Didn't have great production at Northwestern, but the fact is he was basically the only guy on that Northwestern defensive line. Then went to the combine and just blew up the combine. What was it? 37.5-inch vertical jump, 4.49 in the 40. I was told reporting 4.55, and I was even slow. And if you ever get to talk to Adebawore, you'll fall in love with him because the guy's articulate. He's intelligent. I sat down with him for a half hour at the combine. We actually talked about track and field more than we talked about football. He's a great conversationalist. Many things you can do with him, and I think he's going to be a great pro. Mazi Smith's been one of my favorite guys for 3 years, and I've said this. When people were talking about David Ajabu and Aiden Hutchinson and Mike Morris, was 58 in the middle of the field, who's occupying the gaps, who was taking on 2 and 3 blockers that allowed those guys on the edge to make those plays. I am disappointed that we didn't get to see him test, because if you go back to the first show that we did in August of last year, we had Bruce Feldman on. I think Mazi Smith was the number 1 guy on his freak list and was supposed to run under 7 seconds in the 3-cone, was going to have a vertical jump in the mid-30s and a huge super fast 40 time. We didn't get to see any of that, which disappoints me. I also think he didn't show much improvement in his game, but still, 6'3", 232 pounds. He can make plays, not a great pass rusher, but he can penetrate the line of scrimmage, make plays behind the line of scrimmage, does a lot of things well. I am not as high on Kalijah Kancey as most people. You see some people have him in the middle of the first round. I have him as a second-round pick. Could he go late first round? I agree, but Kancey was a real good college player. 6'1", 281 pounds, on a Pittsburgh Panther defensive line that had good talent on it. They're going to have the kid Baldonado, the defensive end, who's going to get selected in day 3. They got the other kid, Desir Alexander, who may go 7th round. If he's not 7th round, he's a priority free agent. So Kalijah Kancey, even though he had great production, had all this good talent around him to spread out the blockers. And you watch him, as far as I'm concerned, he is a one-dimensional 3-technique tackle. There is a need for that at the next level, although there's not a great need because not all teams use that type of player. Small guy, doesn't have great growth potential. I just think that he is limited compared to the other guys, which is why I have him rated after Adebawore, after Mazi Smith. He may be selected beforehand, earlier, but I just think he has limitations compared to those guys.
And I love Keanu Benton. You want a nice double in the gap for a second-round pick. He can stop the run. He can rush the passer. He was probably the second best defensive lineman at the Senior Bowl after Adebawore. I think he's just really, really solid, Tony. I love him. I like him a lot.
Yeah, I had 2 good days of practice at the Senior Bowl. Kind of tailed off at the end. The first day was really good. The only thing I'll say about Benton is, you go back and you watch the Ohio State film, and Luke Whippler, who's a smaller guy, just dominated him. Just absolutely dominated. Benton was not even around. You never heard his name called. And Ohio State blew Wisconsin away that game. I'm just wondering, is he a playmaker? He was a playmaker at Wisconsin. I like him as a player. I just don't love him. And that Ohio State game, and I hate grading players on one single game. I never do it. But that Ohio State game where Whippler took him out of the contest, I just can't stop thinking about that game.
Well, Tony, to feel better about him, go watch his game against John Michael Schmitz against Minnesota.
I will. That's funny you said it.
And that'll make you feel better about him. Because he actually, I think, got the better of John Michael Schmitz in that game. All right, the rest of the tackles real quick. I'll just run down a couple things on a couple of these guys, and you can take it however you want, Tony. Gervon Dexter tested great at the combine. You watch him, I don't know if it's like he has a built-in, like, 2-second delay on his get off. Like the ball snapped, he sits there, and then he goes, and I don't understand why. If he could fix that, I think he could be a pretty good player. Siaki Ika, just a big plotting, two-gap type of guy. I don't see much pass rush for him down the road. I think he's just that. Zach Pickens, I think, is a solid third-round pick. I agree. He can do a little bit of everything. And then Jacqueline Roy out of LSU. Again, I think, to me, he's a weird guy because he's only 305 pounds, but you watch him and you think he's a lot heavier than that, and he's a plugger. So that's kind of how I view the final four guys, if you want to just take one or two and give a quick thumbnail.
Well, that's why I have Roy as a 4th-round pick, because of exactly that. Ika is your typical zero technique nose tackle, Pittsburgh Steelers type of 3-4 plug in the middle guy. Zach Pickens, I like. I mean, if I'm looking for a 3 technique tackle, I'm looking more towards Zach Pickens in the 3rd round than Kalijah Kancey in the 1st round. I mean, 6'4", 291 pounds. Tested decently at the combine. You watch him, he is super quick off the snap with an explosive first step, which makes it at times impossible to block him. Plays with great head level, great leverage. I just think that Pickens is very underrated. I see all the love thrown towards Kancey, and I'm looking at Pickens, and I'm looking at Pickens' body of work, and I'm like, you know what? I'd rather wait and get a guy like Pickens rather than expend early draft capital on a Kalijah Kancey.
All right, let's jump over to inside linebacker. But first, folks, just a reminder, if you're enjoying this, go subscribe to Draft Season on your favorite podcast platform. If an Apple Podcast, leave a 5-star positive review. It would help us out a lot. And, of course, you can also find this on the Giants app podcast and the Giants.com/podcast. Remember, though, it's not a Giants podcast. It's a draft podcast. So make sure you go check it out. Tell your friends if they're big draft fans, even if they're not, fans of the local teams here in New York. As you can see, we haven't mentioned the Giants once, except for the big flag behind me, this entire podcast. We do drafts up, not necessarily a Giant focus. So if you have friends that are football fans, tell them to check it out. We try to inform and entertain you with some of this draft talk. All right, Tone, let's go to inside linebacker. Not the best year for inside linebackers and off-ball guys here. And your top guy is a 2nd-round grade, Jack Campbell. I think he's probably my top inside linebacker too. Drew Sanders at number 2. Owen Papo, who tested very well from Auburn, at number 3. And then you're getting into the undersized crew, right? You got Henry To'oTo'o from Alabama, who I think you really like his instincts. And then DeMario Overshown from Texas at 5, who I think is an interesting athlete, a good player. Deion Henley at number 6 out of Washington State. Noah Sewell, number 7 out of Oregon. D. Winters, number 8 out of TCU. You have a 4th-round grade on him. Isaiah Moore, 5th-round grade out of NC State at number 9 on your list. And then Jeremy Banks out of Tennessee at number 10. I'll just throw a couple names at you, and then you can throw a couple back after you comment on mine, Tony. I think Deion Henley's interesting. I realize he's very undersized. He's a converted safety, but boy, his coverage skills at linebacker are phenomenal. I mean, I hate making these comparisons because he's so good, but if there's a Fred Warner-y player in this draft, I think he's it. He doesn't have the length that Warner has, which I think kind of holds him back a little bit, but he's kind of that undersized inside linebacker. That's the one guy that kind of stands out to me in this group where I think you can get some good value on day 2.
Yeah, and probably faster than Fred Warner. And as you said, I mean, his cover skills, especially during Senior Bowl practice, were outstanding. And if you watch the Washington State film, he's basically used in the box and in pursuit. But the ability to make plays in reverse, and as we saw at the Senior Bowl, he was able to stay downfield step for step and cover running backs and tight ends in the one-on-one drills. Not just the scrimmage, in the one-on-one drills, he really stood out.
And those drills are designed for linebackers to look bad, and he looked good.
And he made the running backs and tight ends look bad, which I think, like you said, 6'1", 225 pounds. Doesn't have great growth potential. He's not going to be a 245-pound guy, but he's got that speed. He's got that, the ability to cover a great amount of area. Jack Campbell and Sanders, I have them neck and neck. Drew Sanders could be selected before Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell, to me, he's just a complete 3-down linebacker. Tough run defender, can rush the passer, can play off the line of scrimmage. Papo, another smaller guy like Henley, but can go sideline to sideline, covers a lot of area. struggles getting through the traffic. It's going to needs a free shot at the ball. Henry Totoa, a guy who's just been a real good player the past couple of years. And like you said, isn't the fastest guy, 4.65 in the 40, but covers a lot of area, sees the play and recognizes what's going to happen before it does. Same thing with Noah Sewell. And I know Noah Sewell didn't have the production that people expected this season, did not have the great year that people expected. But when I talked to Oregon people, that was the design. He was there to occupy blockers and set the edge as much as he was to make plays on the ball. Ran a 4.64 at the combine. He's just a smart, instinctive guy that is a real good run defender. One of my favorite guys, who is probably going to go in the 5th round, Isaiah Moore of North Carolina State, had a good 6'2.5", 233 pounds, ran 4.68 at the pro day, has played in both the 4.3 and the 3.4 at North Carolina State. He's tough. He's smart. Interviewed him at the Shrine game. He is a guy that, you want to be behind him if things get tough, if there's about to be a throwdown, because he is that type of tough guy. And just a real good football player who I think is going to be underdrafted and is going to go much later than people expect. And we've seen that with inside linebackers before. They go day 3 and they turn into real good starters on Sunday. That's where I like Isaiah Moore of North Carolina State.
Yeah, I thought D. Winters covered well at the Senior Bowl as well on a couple reps, but I wish he tested better. His testing at the combine just wasn't great for a guy that size at 5'11", 227. And then tell me about Jeremy Banks, Tony, because that's the first time his name's been mentioned on this podcast all year. I haven't watched him. Give me the lowdown on Jeremy Banks.
Sort of your Owen Popo type in the sense that 6'1.5", 232 pounds, good run and chase type of pursuit linebacker. He's tough though. I mean, Banks is tough. He will throw down. He will come up and challenge the bigger ball carriers, the bigger tight ends. He's not afraid, to compete, to throw his body around the field. But he's just small, and he's got the same issues as Popo. And being that he is that small, he's going to struggle getting through the traffic, and he needs a free shot at the ball. I do like Banks a lot, though. I like him a lot as a pursuit type of linebacker, who's also probably going to be a very good special teams player on coverage units. And that's something we don't talk about. When you get those guys in the later rounds, you're maybe looking at them as your 5th, 6th, 7th linebacker who really stand out on special teams. That's where Jeremy Banks fits in.
All right, let's go to cornerback here, Tony. And we've talked a lot about this group because it's such a deep group. And we have 10 here. I'm going to throw other names out that you couldn't even get into your top 10 that are going to be day 2 picks. I mean, we're going to have 12, 15-ish corners maybe go in the first 3 rounds. It's going to be pretty crazy. So Christian Gonzalez is your number 1. Devon Witherspoon, your number 2. Joey Porter Jr., your number 3. Deontay Banks, your number 4. That, I think, is generally maybe not that order, but the top 4 guys. That's kind of chalky if you look at a lot of the people that do draft stuff. DJ Turner, I think you're a little bit higher on than other people. Yeah. You have him as a 1-2, a little undersized at 178, but ran a ridiculous 4.26. Really good movement skills out of Michigan at number 5. And then you got a bunch of guys, and there's going to be a second-round run here, Tony, and you have these guys all stacked up very close to each other with second-round grades. Cam Smith out of South Carolina, Keely Ringo out of Georgia, Smith's teammate Darius Rush out of South Carolina. You have Emmanuel Forbes all the way down at number 9, mostly, I imagine, because he's 166 pounds, because I think he is round 1 tape. And then you have Eli Ricks out of Alabama, who, boy, we can get more into him. He scares the heck out of me, but he's got the tools, right? And he has the pedigree at 6'2", 188 out of Alabama at number 10. So go wherever you want with this group.
First, I'll say, it's funny you say you're going to have 14, 15 cornerbacks taken in the first 2 rounds. I have 15 cornerbacks with solid 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round grade. That's the number that I have, okay? A lot of people like Witherspoon over Gonzalez. I was not big on Gonzalez until I watched them play, until I watched the film. And I saw a guy who was exceptional in man coverage. The one thing I love about Gonzalez, like Witherspoon, is does a great job making plays with his back to the ball. He gets his head back around. He tracks the pass in the air, doesn't play the receiver's hands, doesn't do much face guarding. Probably not as good in zone coverage as Devin Witherspoon is, but he's much faster. Witherspoon, there was questions as to whether or not he was going to run. Finally ran a pro day, ran the mid 4.4s, which is really a good time for Witherspoon. with Gonzalez 6'1.5", 197, ran 4.3 at the combine. So I think he's just got to improve his play in zone. But I love his game. I love his upside. Witherspoon is probably the most polished of all the cornerbacks. I mean, he's got the best body of work. He's physical. He's tough. I think that mid 4.4 time at his own individual pro day just a couple of weeks ago, eased some concerns about him, but he's got to show that speed on field because he doesn't show himself to be a real fast cornerback. He's tough, he's feisty, and he's instinctive. Joey Porter Jr., I think, has got great upside. I think he's got to polish his game. 6'2.5", 193 pounds. Made an impact at Penn State, stepping on the field as a freshman. Obviously has the bloodlines. Just has to polish the details of his game. Deonte Banks is a guy who, in a lot of ways, came out of nowhere. I mean, no one was talking about Deonte Banks in August, but what was happening was the Maryland Terrapin coaches were telling scouts, you better watch this guy. Tested great at the combine, 6 foot, 197 pounds, ran a 4.35. But he's also a good player. You watch the film, he's like Christian Gonzalez in man coverage. He gets downfield, he gets his head back around, tracks the ball in the air, and positions himself. So he's not just a big, fast guy. He's a big, fast guy who's also a real good cornerback.
A lot of press man from him on his tape. They were on almost all press man.
And he did a good job of it. Yep. He did a good job of it. And the thing about DJ Turner is you're right. I'm higher on DJ Turner the most, but I look at DJ Turner. He was a real good cornerback for 3 years at Michigan. He's a guy who has got terrific ball skills. Sometimes it's tough to really scout him because opposing quarterbacks were purposely staying away from him. Goes to the combine, runs the 4.26. You hear about all these, this team needs a slot corner. This team needs a slot corner. This team needs a slot corner. DJ Turner's the guy who is, in my opinion, one of the best slot corners in this draft. You go down the list. I agree with you about Eli Ricks. I think he started basically started 7 games last year. He started, I don't even think, barely double digits the past 3 years at LSU and Alabama. He's been injured, ran a 4.55 at Pro Day. But you watch the film and you can see the underlying skills for Eli Ricks to be potentially a big-time corner at the next level.
It's funny, Tony, but then there are other reps where you see him, stumble. I've never seen a corner stumble more than I've seen Eli Ricks stumble, and I'm like, you're an elite athlete. How are you, almost falling down on double moves? I don't understand.
Eli Ricks, you got to remember, there were people early on who thought that Eli Ricks was a first-round prospect. I never bought into that. I felt that Eli Ricks really should have gone back to Alabama and really develop his game and show some durability and show more production on the field and really come into the draft as more of a finished prospect product, then maybe would have been a first-round pick in 2024. He chose to leave. There's a lot of risk. It's not only because he's going to be drafted later, but so many curves, the learning curve, the playing curve, the competition curve is so much steeper on Sunday than it is on Saturday. It may be a little bit difficult for him, but, at times when he flashes the brilliance, you're like, wow, and he is a tough physical player. And you're right about Forbes. 6 foot 1/2 inch, 170 pounds. He struggles, defending the contested throw on Saturday. How's that going to do on Sunday? How's he going to support the run on Sunday? Is he an outside starting corner? Is he a slot corner? Is he a nickel? What is he at that size? And if he puts on 10 to 15 pounds, is he going to be the same 4.35 cornerback that we saw, the past 2 seasons anyway at Mississippi State, as well as at the Combine?
Yeah, I want to focus in on that kind of group of Cam Smith, Keely Ringo, Darius Rush that you have there, Tony, because to me, they're all pretty similar, right? They're, around the same height. Keely Ringo's the biggest. He had the best, tied with Rush for the 40 time. Then Ringo ran his agility drills in 3-cone, and they were a disaster. I mean, they were bad. So I still don't know quite how he fits. And then I think, Cam Smith, I think is probably going to be a pretty good man corner. I think he's a safe second-round pick. And then Darius Rush is interesting because I believe he's a converted wide receiver, right? And you saw those skills at the Senior Bowl where when he played press man at the Senior Bowl, Tony, he was running routes for guys. And he got interceptions, got his hands on the football. Now, he had some rough reps too, where he got burnt on a couple double moves. But to me, if you're looking for press man corners, I feel much better about Cam Smith and Rush than I do Ringo, who I know has a lot of talent, but there are some stuff on tape that really scares me.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some off the field issues with Smith as far as maturity that really has teams concerned, which is why he's not going to be a first round choice. I mean, we were talking about Cam Smith
Yep.
2 months ago as a potential mid-first round pick. He's not going to go in the first round, and he's very unpolished. Talked about how, Deonte Banks and Christian Gonzalez makes plays with their back to the ball and gets their head back around and doesn't face guard. I see a lot of face guarding when I see Cam Smith. As far as
a lot of flags down the field on him on tape
because he can't get his head back around. He doesn't get his head back around. He doesn't track the ball. It's funny you mentioned Kelee Ringo runs a great 40 time, but then the other numbers were terrible. That's what we see with Kelee Ringo on film. He makes some great plays, and then there are sometimes you're wondering what the heck's going on, and people focus on the highlights rather than getting deep into the film, because when you get deep into the film, you see a guy who struggles staying with receivers out of their breaks, a guy who struggles sometimes getting his head back around to track the pass in the air, doesn't properly position himself, doesn't find the ball in the air. Yeah, everybody loves those highlights. And to his credit, he played well down the stretch in that semifinal game against Ohio State, made some big plays. But when you look at the overall body of work, it doesn't come close to the Christian Gonzalez or even Deonte Banks, who really was a one-year standout at Maryland. Darius Rush, you're looking at upside. You're looking at a guy who made the transition to cornerback. He's got excellent size. He's got excellent speed. You're saying he's good now. He could be outstanding down the road. We could get this guy in round 2, and he could be an outstanding starting outside corner for us with that size, with that speed, and with those ball skills that he's flashed. We'll just have to develop him more.
Yeah, and we mentioned what a deep position this is. So, Tony, I'm going to throw some other names at you, and if you want to add some, you can. These are other guys that I think could go on day 2. Julius Brents, the big cornerback, 6'4", tested extremely well, was really, really good for some reps, 6'3", pardon me, at the Senior Bowl. I think he has a chance to get into even the end of round 2, at worst the beginning of round 3. Not a lot of slot corners in this draft, Tony. It's kind of been inundated with slot guys the last few years, but one of the guys that I like on day 2 is Clark Phillips, who's kind of like a stout, good cover guy. He's more of a slot. I think Stanford's Kyu Blu Kelly could get into the 3rd round. Solid, bigger guy. He can play outside if you need him. He doesn't wow you, but I think he'll be a solid player. I like Terrell Smith out of Minnesota. I think he's a guy that's going to be a day 2 pick. You want a press man corner that can run? I think he's a guy that I think could be a late day 2 pick in round 3. Tyreek Stevenson of Miami is somebody I know a lot of people like. I've seen him slip into the 1st round in some mock drafts. I don't know. He's kind of in that Kelee Ringo neighborhood for me, where there's some stuff on tape that kind of scares me a little bit. I don't think he's consistent enough. And then Garrett Williams out of Syracuse is another guy, right? He's another kind of a slotty guy. He's dealing with an ACL injury. We'll see when he's ready. But I know people, and you see it on tape, his movement skills are very, very strong. So pick out any of those guys you want, agree or disagree, have at it.
I'll go 2 disagrees first. Kyu Blu Kelly, I got him graded much lower. I agree with you, and we saw at the Senior Bowl, when Kyu Blu Kelly is facing the action, you put him in his own system, you back him off the line of scrimmage, looks very good. Can't make plays with his back to the ball. I mean, he's worse than some of the guys we talked about earlier on who never get their head back around, does a lot of grabbing, doesn't track the ball in the air. So Kyu Blu Kelly, you're going to have to play him facing the action. No doubt about it. Terrell Smith, I love his upside. I like his future potential, but I think he's a ways off compared to a Deonte Banks. Really started to take the position this year, had some solid reps and some solid days of practice at the Shrine game, which is why I have him graded as a 4th round pick right now. Completely agree with you on Clark Phillips. I mean, if Clark Phillips was 3 inches taller, we're talking about Clark Phillips as a top 42 choice. He's feisty. He's aggressive. He's got outstanding ball skills. He does a great job getting his head back around to track the ball in the air. But the fact is that 5'9", he's going to lose out to those 6'2" receivers when the ball is in the air. It's just a matter of height. Love his game, but the measurables kind of push him down. Tyreek Stevenson, I've liked him since his days at Georgia, but there's never been a consistent, upward motion with his game. He's all over the place. There's a lack of balance there. He's tall. He's explosive. He's very quick. He shows flashes. He's got to put it together. I do like Garrett Williams a lot. He's going to have to rebound from that ACL, but he showed a lot of ability. His battle against Charlie Jones in that Purdue game is something to watch. I think, I have him as a 3rd round pick. It's obviously going to take a while to see how soon he gets back. Julius Brents is sort of a guy who shows flashes. He's sort of like the defensive end from Kansas State in that he's got a lot of upside, he's got a lot of potential, but he needs more consistency.
Yeah, I think for a guy his size, he needs to be a little more physical too. I think he could be, but he doesn't show that on tape quite enough at the line of scrimmage. All
Also
right,
got beaten like a drum by Quentin Johnston in that TCU in that Big 12 title game against TCU.
Yeah. Really good game, by the way, that Kansas State TCU
It
game.
was.
Yeah, Julius Brents had some issues in that game, no question. All right, safety. This, Tony, you could argue this is the weakest position in the draft. I don't think many would disagree. I think linebacker is kind of in that category too, right? Brian Branch, we talked a ton about him. Safety, slot, take your pick. Sidney Brown, I know both of us really like him. He wowed us in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Can play at the line of scrimmage, rocked up, great body, good ball skills, can tackle. He kind of chucks all the boxes for you. Then these are the next group we haven't talked about quite as much. Antonio Johnson out of Texas A&M, and a lot of people like him. Jordan Battle did not test really well out of Alabama. J.L. Skinner out of Boise State. Jartavius Martin out of Illinois, another Illinois corner, defensive back rather. Jamie Robinson out of Florida State, Chris Smith out of Georgia. I consider them in the same kind of category as slotty safety types. And then Jair Brown and Daniel Scott finish off your top 10. Those last four guys with day 3 grades from you, Tony. You can touch on anyone you want or just talk about the position in general.
Robinson's a good player, just not a great athlete. Same thing with for Florida State. Same thing with Chris Smith of Georgia. I mean, both of these guys are good football players.
Boy, Chris Smith's testing. Oh, boy.
Same thing with Jamie Robinson. Jamie Robinson was not that great. Barely got under 4.6. I mean, his numbers were not that great either. So, and they both 5'10" and a half. Robinson is 191. Smith is 192 pounds, and neither of them are fast. And where do you draft a defensive back who barely breaks 4.6 in the 40?
And their tape's good, like you mentioned. Their tape's good, and then both guys, Robinson and Smith, are both good at the Senior Bowl too.
And Smith's tape is outstanding, really. I mean, the 4 or 5.8 really killed them, but they're both good football players, which is why I have them as day 3 picks. The question is, are they traditional free safeties? Does the lack of speed have it so you have to play them in a zone type system? I mean, I think a lot has to be determined in the system they play, in the team that they that selects them, and how do you use them? Can you play him over a slot receiver, or is that lack of deep speed a liability? Yeah. Jair Brown is pretty much the same sort of a player. 5'11" and a half, 203 pounds, 4.57 in the 40. Smart, tough, instinctive, but just not a great athlete. And that's why I have all those guys as 4th round picks. Daniel Scott is a guy who he is athletic, ran 4.45. He's got excellent size at 6'1", 208 pounds. He just doesn't show that great sideline to sideline range. He's more of a downhill type of safety, which I think you're going to have to use in a zone type of system. Those guys are those scheme-specific guys, a box safety, your prototypical strong safety. They don't have the same attractiveness on draft day as, say, a guy like Sidney Brown or a guy like Brian Branch, who can go sideline to sideline. You can place them over the slot receiver, and they're not going to be a liability. And again, go back to the special teams factor. Daniel Scott, you're going to look at him as a zone safety, downhill guy, but you really also get the added benefit of a gunner on special teams where he really should stand out.
All right, then run down your 4 third-round guys too, Tony, because I don't think we've mentioned these guys a ton. Antonio Johnson, Jordan Battle, J.L. Skinner, and Jartavius Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people like Antonio Johnson. He just doesn't do it for me. And I'll go back and watch the film to see if I'm missing something. That's what I do at this point during the year. I'll go back, and if some people have other players rated higher than I do, I'll say I'll go take a look back and see if I'm missing something. He just doesn't have that great sideline to sideline range. Jordan Battle, he kind of fits in with the Jamie Robinson, Chris Smith types in the sense that real good football player, sideline to sideline, was a great compliment to Brian Branch at Alabama, a real playmaker, but again, runs a 4.55. So that's why I have him in the 3rd round. Skinner is excellent size, 6'3" and a half, 209 pounds, runs under 4.5. More of a downhill type of hard-hitting safety with solid movement skills. I don't think he's a traditional free safety. Jartavius Martin is probably the wild card here. He's the guy who could be from Illinois. Could go in the 3rd round, could end up starting. 5'11", 193 pounds, tested incredibly well. Came out of nowhere this year because as a senior, he was not even graded by scouts coming into the season, had a phenomenal year, is the safety that you can line up over the slot receiver, shows good ball skills, a little bit unpolished in his game, but's got a great amount of upside. And he, in my opinion anyway, could be the sleeper at the safety position in this year's draft. In the sense sleeper, I mean that I don't think he's going to go, in the first round, but I think 2 or 3 years down the road, they could be saying, wow, how did Jartavius Martin get out of the top 60 picks in the 2023 NFL draft?
All right, let's get to some questions here on Twitter, Tony. This one from at Stacy Patton, 89. He wants to know, how do you view interior defensive line prospects who have the tools to be effective pass rushers or tackle for loss guys, but haven't done it yet? How do you work in the role that they were asked to play in college, which might be, playing a little two-gap, into that evaluation when you try to figure out what their potential is?
Well, I mean, that would be a guy like Carl Brooks, who we saw at the Senior Bowl, was a combine snub. He's quick, he's explosive, but he's not the biggest guy in the world, and he's not the strongest guy in the world. So you got to look at the level of competition. You got to look at, how they played and their productivity on the college level, and then you have to project it to the next level. I mean, Kalijah Kancey's just the opposite, right? Kalijah Kancey's smaller. He's very athletic. He was insanely productive, but he played on a defensive line that had a lot of talent. So, you've got to, in my opinion, project to not only what's going to happen on draft day, but 2 or 3 years down the line. A guy like Carl Brooks of Bowling Green, I think, fits that perfectly, which is why I have him as a potential steal on day 3.
All right, let's go to at Marty Gennaro. John and Tony, are there any of the smaller linebackers who are fast enough that you think they might project to safety at the next level, Tony?
I don't know that there's. I think it's more. You got larger safeties who may project to linebacker.
I
mean, D. Winters is a smaller guy at 227 pounds. Ivan Pace of Cincinnati, who we saw at the Shrine game, 5'10 and a half, 222 pounds, runs a 4.59. I'm looking at my list here. Deshaun White of Oklahoma, 214 pounds. I would look at it. I don't see any of that. I would look at it the other way, safeties who may ultimately project to linebackers at the next level, bigger safeties, I should say.
Yeah, that's how generally you guys move. I agree with you. Victor Suarez, what is your opinion of Brandon Hill, safety for Pitt?
Physical, decent athlete. I hate to use the word headhunter, but he's always looking to intimidate people. Doesn't have great sideline to sideline range. More opportunistic than he is a playmaker, and there is a difference. I like his upside. I have him as a day 3 pick. I think he's got to polish his game. And again, Brandon Hill in that Pitt, the Panther secondary benefited from the play up front from their defensive line.
Evan Decker, Tony, who's the best late round blitzing linebacker, and why is it Ivan Pace Jr.?
Why isn't it Ivan Pace Jr.? Because Ivan Pace Jr. is small. Let me just pull up my my list here for a second. I mean, Ivan Pace Jr. is under 6 foot, under 230 pounds. The best late round blitzing linebacker, I like Andre Jones of Louisiana, 6'4 and a half, 248 pounds, 4.76. I think Isaiah Land of Florida A&M, who got a lot of preseason hype, which he really didn't deserve, but he's still a good football player. You're looking at a day 3 blitzing linebacker. Jose Ramirez of Eastern Michigan, who did a great job of it at Eastern Michigan the past 2 years. He's got to get a little bit bigger. Maybe Andre Carter of Army, if he gets drafted later on. Here's a name to remember, or 2 names to remember. Celeb Murphy of Ferris State, 6'3 and a half, 254 pounds, was a terror on the Division II level at Ferris State, just rushing the passer. And a guy who really doesn't get much talk at all, Darrell Johnson of Liberty, 6'5", 250 pounds, ran a 4.65 at his pro day. I think last year he had like 25 tackles for loss. And, in the day and age of Malik Willis, when you watch the Liberty film, when you watch it both ways, it was Darrell Johnson, who may end up not even getting selected in the draft, which I think would be a sin, who was an outstanding stand-up 3-4 outside linebacker type.
All right, Michael James, one of our Giant fan followers, wants to know, do you think the Giants could wait until pick 89 to draft a future corner that can start for you, or is that too long of a wait? Should they try to attack one earlier?
Well, I mean, we just talked about that, right? I mean, pick 89, maybe Tariq Stevenson is there. We didn't talk about Riley Moss, who is, a terrific cornerback with outstanding ball skills. I mean, are you going to get a starter at pick 89? Potentially you could in this draft because there's so many good players. I mean, if you're looking for an outside corner, I mean, Stevenson's 6 foot 1/2 inch, 198 pounds. Riley Moore, 6 foot 1/2 inch, 194 pounds. And, Moss has been probably more consistent than Stevenson as far as his ball skills are concerned. So, I'm going to say better than 50-50, yes.
All right, let's go to Alaska Mac. Where's that mask? What is that? No, Alaska Mac. I had it right. Which day 2-3 nose tackles could the Seahawks look to fill Al Woods and Poona Ford's spots?
Okay. Well, I don't. It's going to go early. If you're talking about Poona Ford, maybe Keandre Coburn of Texas, who I have right now as a 5th-round choice. Gerard Clark of Coastal Carolina. Two different types of players. Clark is more of your gap occupier. Keandre Coburn is more of your playmaker. I think both of those guys are day 3 nose tackle types that can be had. Later on, maybe PJ Mustipher of Penn State. He's more of a 4-3, or he played more of a 4-3 defensive tackle position at Penn State, but still 6'4", 320 pounds, very explosive, can also fill that role. He's going to be a day 3 pick.
At Nico M4NX, John and Tony love the show. Is edge or defensive line the bigger need for the Giants? And any talent you foresee available here in rounds 2 or 3? I think defensive line is probably a bigger need because Leonard Williams is going into the last year of his contract. Dexter Lawrence is going into the last year of his contract. So I think there is more of a need there, but I would not be surprised if they added an edge rusher, given Azeez Ojulari struggles with injuries his first couple of years in the league, which was a big reason, by the way, he dropped to round 2. KJ Henry, Tony, from Clemson. This question is from at Giant Things. Where do you think he'll go in terms of round, and what do you think the best situation for him is to succeed at the NFL level? KJ Henry, a talented edge player out of Clemson.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of fits in with the last question, right? If the Giants are looking for an edge rusher, day 3, KJ Henry I don't think he's going to get into day 2, but a guy who was a consistent player for a number of years at Clemson that had a ton of talent on that defensive line. We talk about Miles Murphy, we talk about Breeze, but they had KJ Henry. They got guys who are coming back next year. I think a little bit underrated, underappreciated, can stand over tackle, can come out of a 3-point stance. And again, I think he's more of a day 3 type of selection. Goes hand in hand with the last question from the gentleman who asked, what about pass rushers? Well, KJ Henry sitting there in the 5th round, 6'4.5", 251 pounds. It'd be tough to pass up.
Agree. All right. Jeff Smith wants to know, I do not know who will be available on day 2 or 3, but would like to know about pass rushers and linebackers who might be there for us to draft. Well, I think we went through those on our rankings, Jeff, so hopefully you got what you needed out of that. Jim McHugh. He wants to ask about linebacker Isaiah Land, who you just talked about, Tony. Also wants to know about linebacker Anthony Orji. Then he has a couple other positions. Why don't we touch on Anthony Orji first?
Orji's your prototypical middle inside linebacker. He's a guy who, made a lot of plays against the run, very smart, very aggressive, then tested off the charts at the combine. People were expecting this guy to run a 4.8. He ran in the low 4.5, in the mid 4.5s. So he tested much better than anybody expected. I got to interview him at the Shrine game. I shook his hand. I thought he was going to break every bone in my hand. That's the type of build, this type of makeup he has. Goes to Vanderbilt, so he's smart. I think he's a day 3 pick. If you're looking for a 2-down run defending linebacker, you're looking towards Orji in the later rounds.
All right. Then he also wants to know about defensive tackles Brooks, who you just talked about, right, from Bowling Green. Pickens, who we talked about in the defensive tackle group. He also wants to know about Keandre Coburn, who you kind of mentioned in passing, Tony, out of Texas. Tell me about him.
Yeah, Coburn was a guy who really caught my eye early on as a freshman. He's, sort of that bowling ball, sawed-off type of defensive tackle, 6'1.5", 322 pounds, explosive, quick, doesn't always play like an overpowering 322-pound defensive tackle does, as you would expect. But he moves very well. He shows himself to be a good pass rusher, can change direction. He's more of your one gap nose tackle, if you will. One gap meaning you line up three guys with their hands in the ground. You have your outside linebacker basically standing up over tackle. I think that's where Coburn is a good fit. I'm disappointed in him in that sense that when I watched him as a freshman, and I took my notes on him, I expected him to be much better this later in his career, much more advanced than he is. I expected him to be a top, potential 60 pick, and we're not talking about him like that.
All right, and then finally, he wants to know about Tyreek Stevenson, who we've talked about, Darius Rush, who we've talked about, and then Riley Moss, who you just mentioned, Tony. And as soon as you mentioned his name, I'm like, oh, John, you forgot to mention him as a day 2 corner. I think Riley Moss is a day 2 cornerback. I think he's a better player than Kyu Blu-Kelly, who I mentioned earlier. I think Moss is good. I think he's a good athlete. He's got size. He can run. I think he's going to be a real solid pro. I'm not sure if he's a press man guy. I think you maybe want him facing the action a little bit. Your more detailed thoughts on Moss?
Yeah, I would disagree with that because, it's funny. I had to go back and watch Lucas Van Ness because I didn't do him the first time I went through my Iowa film. And again, I became more appreciative of Riley Moss. The way he's able to run downfield with opponents, the way he gets his head back around, tracks the pass in the air, makes his move to the throw, positions himself against the receiver, and defends the pass. So I think you can play him because he's good in transition. He gets his head, doesn't do a lot of face guarding. I think he's got to be more consistent. I mean, he's just very underappreciated in a lot of ways. Again, go back to one of the earlier questions. Can the Giants get a cornerback at 89 that's available that could potentially be a starter? I think it's Riley Moss. I don't know if he's going to start in 2023, but I think down the road, Riley Moss is going to be a real good cornerback that can play in a variety of schemes.
Tony, good stuff, my friend. I have a question about who the Giants would take at 25. I'll save that till next week when we do our big draft questions on our final mock. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, good show. I mean, we packed it all in here, didn't we? A lot of questions. I mean, next week we'll have a lot more information, hopefully. I mean, you got to kind of decide which is true and which is just somebody throwing a lot of garbage out there. And we're getting closer, right, John?
Yeah, no questions. Well, we're going to try to do 2 shows next week. We're going to do a show Monday and Wednesday and just try to get the big questions answered from the draft. And then we'll get Tony's final, what he's hearing, and final mock draft. I think what I might do, I might have Tony do the final mock himself, and I'll kind of pepper him with questions throughout. But we'll figure that out. We'll get those 2 out to you next week, Monday and Wednesday, as we head up to the draft, which is a week away. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. This is draft season.